Every time I read this gospel passage of scripture, I see yet one more reference to how the principal players in the story viewed what was happening. Everybody involved had their ideas of what was supposed to happen and what wasn't supposed to happen. One perspective, and I think you'll recognize this, hey, there's a guy begging daily in the street. He has had to beg since he was a child because he or his parents sinned. Another perspective. I can't see, and I've never been able to see. I've never seen my mother's face. But God supplies my need, and I interact daily with the folks from the village. Some are kind exchanges, some not so kind treatment from passersby. I see a lot more than what you realize. This particular perspective changes one day when a man comes into town. I don't know who this man is, but he has changed my life in 0.3 seconds. Once I rinse the mud off my eyes in the pool of water. There's Jesus' perspective. Well, I can't tell you what Jesus was thinking because I'd be God then. All I can do, much like the man who was given sight by Jesus' actions, is react to what Jesus did. That's all we can do. Apparently, Jesus wanted the best for this man, who, by the way, it bothers me a little bit, and maybe it bothers you too, that he doesn't have a name. There's another blind man in the Gospel of Mark who has a name, Bartimaeus. And he happens to be one of my favorites too. Jesus is my all-time favorite. I want to tell you my perspective. Much like the blind man, I've seen Jesus do wondrous things in my life and in the lives of those around me. Like the woman at the well from last week's gospel, Jesus changes the life of the man who was born blind, and he changes the lives of others in the village because of that testimony. Remember, Jesus' job in all of this was to reveal God to us. We see God through the actions of Jesus. None of us can explain scientifically the reality of God becoming a human being, growing up amongst us, walking with us, most likely closer than that 6-foot distance that we're supposed to keep from each other today. None of us can explain how it is that God stands right in front of us and leads us through life. He leads us through lush green pastures, alive with the nutrients that we need. He leads us through the unknown, the valley of the shadow of death. No matter where we go, God is with us right there in front of us. As our friend receives new vision, as the Pharisees have serious questions about how God can work outside the structure of set guidelines within the religious institution, as villagers and friends and loved ones witness a dramatic change in this man, as we face uncertain realities, uncertain times in our new realities, Jesus stands in our midst. Jesus knows that we don't have the words to explain what is happening to us, and he knows what we can't adequately describe, how God is meeting our needs in the time of crisis. Jesus stands in our midst and he says, I am he. Just like he did with the woman at the well. Follow me, drink from this wellspring that will never run dry. Trust me. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This week as I was praying, I I realize that all of us are going to be different on the other side of this new reality. We will be changed. And God will be glorified. We walk through this season of Lent, through the dry desert, but there will be resurrection. We have that hope. We heard 2 weeks ago in the gospel lesson in the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus that God did not come to condemn us. Jesus is here and he will save us. What do we see God doing? I have to admit that when I go to the grocery store and I see empty shelves, the panic and the anxiety wants to take over within me. We went to the grocery store just this morning and saw some interesting sights that felt like scarcity. And then we drove out into the countryside and took note of the lush pastures and the flowers, trees and bushes budding to new springtime life. It was a reminder that God clothes the fields and feeds the sparrows. And God is not going to forget us. God will take care of us. What do you see God doing? I would love to hear from you about what God is doing in your midst. What's your perspective in these times? I've heard some stories already of neighbors helping each other, of new time set aside for intentional conversation with our loved ones. It seems like the Church of Jesus Christ is practicing Lent, actually. I've heard stories of the pains of temporary separation from loved ones, stories of loneliness, perspectives of the difficulty to move into and live in new realities. We all have these concerns. As your pastor, it pains me not to be able to be with you physically. But I am reminded that God is in the midst, that God is standing, sitting, walking with you. And that comfort is indescribable to me. May you enter this next week with great courage. May you see God anew. I can see like the blind man. May you share that good news in any way possible. God's peace be with you. God is here. Amen.